You've gone 2 days without eating. Yesterday, you finally found what you've been searching for, a herd of animals moving through the valley. You memorized every landmark, every bend in the trail, every place they were likely to stop. Tomorrow was supposed to be the day your family finally ate. Then the sky changes, dark clouds swallow the sun, a cold wind sweeps across the landscape, and within minutes the rain begins to fall. Not the kind of rain that lasts an hour. This storm keeps going, hour after hour, day after day. Soon every trail disappears beneath thick mud. Footprints that once told the story of every passing animal are washed away without a trace. The open ground becomes slippery, every step a gamble. One wrong move on wet rocks could leave you with a broken ankle, and in a world without hospitals, a single injury can become a death sentence. The river beside your shelter begins to swell. Water creeps higher every hour. The fire you've spent days protecting starts hissing beneath the rain, its flames shrinking with every gust of wind. You aren't simply waiting for better weather. You're fighting to stay alive. For modern people, rain usually means changing plans. Maybe you cancel a picnic. Maybe you stay home with a cup of coffee and watch a movie while the drops tap gently against the window. Rain feels peaceful, comfortable, even relaxing, but for people living tens of thousands of years ago, the exact same storm meant something completely different. It threatened everything. Long before cities, roads, or waterproof roofs existed, surviving a rainstorm required constant decisions. Every hour brought new dangers, and making the wrong choice could cost an entire group their lives. The greatest threat wasn't hunger, it was cold. Many people don't realize how dangerous water really is. A soaked human body loses heat dramatically faster than a dry one. Even temperatures that seem mild today can become deadly after several hours of cold rain. As night falls, the danger grows even worse. Without dry clothing or insulated shelter, body temperature begins dropping, hands become numb. Muscles stiffen, thinking slows. Eventually, exhaustion takes over. A person suffering from hypothermia may not even realize they're dying, but freezing wasn't the only problem. Rain transformed the landscape itself. Small streams became rushing rivers. Gentle slopes turned into rivers of mud. Shelters that had remained dry for years could suddenly flood overnight. Many prehistoric people preferred caves or rock overhangs because they offered protection from wind and predators. Yet those same shelters could become deadly traps during powerful storms. Water poured through cave entrances. Loose rocks collapsed from soaked hillsides. Entire camps sometimes had to be abandoned with almost no warning. Then came another danger few people think about. Humans weren't the only creatures searching for shelter. When heavy rain drove animals out of the open, predators headed for the same dry places people depended on. Imagine hearing distant growls echoing inside a dark cave while lightning flashes outside. Leaving meant facing the storm. Staying meant sharing shelter with something capable of killing you. For ancient families, rain compressed the entire world into the few places that remained dry. People, prey, predators, everyone crowded into the same limited spaces. Survival became a balancing act between nature and everything hiding from it. Yet despite all these threats, one object mattered more than food, more than weapons, even more than shelter itself: the fire. As long as the flames stayed alive, there was still hope. If they died, everything else became much harder, and protecting that fire during endless rain may have been one of the most important jobs any ancient human ever had. When the rain refused to stop, every task inside the shelter suddenly became less important than one thing: keeping the fire alive. Today, if a campfire goes out, you grab a lighter or strike a match. 5 minutes later, the flames are back. For ancient humans, it wasn't that simple. For most of prehistory, creating a brand new fire from nothing was incredibly difficult. While our ancestors had mastered the use of fire hundreds of thousands of years ago, many researchers believed that reliably making one whenever they wanted was a very different challenge. In many cases, the safest option wasn't starting a new fire. It was making absolutely sure the old one never died. That single flame represented life itself. It cooked meat that would otherwise be difficult to digest. It provided warmth through freezing nights. It frightened away predators whose eyes glowed just beyond the darkness. It dried soaked clothing and damp animal hides. It offered light after sunset, turning an unsafe cave into a place where people could work, eat, and rest. Without it, survival became dramatically harder. That's why storms were so frightening. Rain didn't just threaten comfort, it threatened the one resource that made every other part of life possible. As the first heavy drops began falling, someone in the group probably took responsibility for the fire. Not hunting, not gathering, not repairing weapons, just protecting the flames. The burning wood would be moved farther inside the shelter, away from wind and dripping water. Larger stones might be arranged around it to block sudden gusts. Animal hides, branches, or natural rock formations helped shield it from the weather. Every movement had to be careful. Feed the fire too much wood and the flames could choke beneath thick smoke. Feed it too little and the last glowing embers might fade forever. The people tending it needed patience, hours of patience. Finding dry fuel during a rainstorm became another challenge entirely. At first glance, every branch outside looked soaked, But experienced hunters knew nature's secrets. They searched beneath the thick canopy of evergreen trees where lower branches often stayed surprisingly dry. Instead of collecting rotten logs lying on the ground, they broke open larger pieces of wood. Although the outside absorbed rain, the center often remained dry enough to burn. Even tree bark became valuable. Certain species, especially birch, contain natural oils that ignite far more easily than ordinary wood. Even after getting wet, strips of birch bark could help bring weak flames back to life. Knowledge like this wasn't written in books, it passed from one generation to the next. Parents showed children which trees to trust, grandparents taught teenagers where to search after storms. Every lesson increased the group's chances of surviving another season. Some communities became so protective of fire that they carried it wherever they traveled. Instead of letting the flames burn openly, they transported glowing embers. Wrapped carefully inside damp leaves, packed inside slow-burning natural materials, or tucked into fungus that could smolder for hours without bursting into flame. The goal wasn't creating fire later. It was making sure it never disappeared in the first place. Thousands of years later, archaeologists found remarkable evidence showing how seriously people treated this responsibility. One of the most famous discoveries came from a man frozen high in the Alps over 5,000 years ago. Beside him was a carefully prepared fire-making kit. It contained everything needed to preserve or restart a flame, special tinder, striking materials, and backup supplies stored together as essential survival equipment. That discovery tells us something important. Even long after humans had developed better techniques for making fire, nobody wanted to take unnecessary risks. Fire was too valuable to lose. Back inside the shelter, while rain hammered the rocks outside, the atmosphere would have been tense. The flames demanded constant attention. Someone adjusted burning logs, someone else searched for more fuel whenever the weather briefly eased. Children stayed close to the warmth while older members watched the cave entrance, listening for unfamiliar sounds beyond the rain. Outside, visibility was poor. The storm hid movement. Predators could approach much closer before being seen. Every crack of a branch, every distant growl, every shadow near the entrance demanded attention. Yet despite all that danger, the fire changed everything. It pushed back the darkness. It dried dripping animal skins hanging from wooden poles. It warmed frozen hands after hours spent gathering fuel. The smell of smoke filled the shelter, mixing with roasting meat and damp earth. For a short time, despite the chaos outside, there was safety, there was comfort, and there was hope. The fire also created something else that often goes unnoticed. Time. No one could hunt during the worst part of the storm. Travel became dangerous. Tracking animals was nearly impossible. Instead of moving across the landscape, families stayed together in one place. Hours stretched into days. Those quiet hours weren't wasted. They became some of the most productive moments in human history. Because while the fire kept everyone alive, the people sitting around it began making the tools, clothing, and inventions that would shape the future, and that's where the story becomes even more fascinating. The storm still hadn't ended. Outside, cold rain drummed endlessly against stone. The ground remained too slippery for hunting, rivers continued to rise, and the forest offered little chance of finding food. But inside the shelter, nobody sat around doing nothing. Every hour trapped indoors became an opportunity. If ancient humans couldn't chase their next meal, they prepared for the ones that would come later. One by one, people reached for unfinished tools. Stone flakes scattered across the cave floor as skilled hands carefully shaped sharp blades from pieces of flint and other hard rocks. Each precise strike removed tiny fragments, slowly turning rough stones into knives, scrapers, spear points, and cutting tools. This wasn't random work, it required concentration. A single mistake could ruin hours of careful shaping. Archaeologists have uncovered countless prehistoric camps where piles of tiny stone chips remain clustered in specific areas. These weren't accidents, they marked the exact places where people sat for hours crafting equipment, likely illuminated by the glow of a nearby fire while storms raged outside. Every finished blade represented another chance to survive the next hunt, but stone wasn't the only material receiving attention. Animal bones collected after successful hunts became equally valuable. Instead of throwing them away, skilled craftspeople transformed them into smooth needles, fishhooks, awls, and delicate carving tools. Making a bone needle demanded extraordinary patience. First, the bone had to be shaped, then polished, then carefully pierced to create an eye small enough for thread. One careless movement could snap the fragile piece in half. This wasn't work done in haste, it was the kind of task that suited long, quiet days when the outside world was inaccessible. With those needles came something equally important: better clothing. Animal hides weren't simply wrapped around the body anymore. They could be stitched together into garments that fit more closely, trapping body heat and protecting against freezing winds. Every careful stitch increased the odds of surviving another winter. Rainstorms may have prevented hunting for a few days, but they helped produce clothing that protected people for years. Then there was another invention that quietly transformed human life: rope. Today it's so ordinary that we barely notice it, but almost every ancient technology depended on it. Without cordage, you couldn't securely fasten a spearhead to a wooden shaft. Building stronger shelters became far more difficult. Traps couldn't function properly. Bundles of firewood were harder to carry. Even simple tasks became frustrating. Making rope, however, wasn't easy. Plant fibers had to be gathered, separated, twisted together, and strengthened through repeated movements. The process was slow, repetitive, sometimes taking hours to produce only a short length. Perfect work for a rainy day. Archaeologists have discovered remarkable evidence showing just how advanced these skills became. At one prehistoric site, researchers found tiny fragments of ancient twisted plant fibers, the oldest direct evidence that humans were already making string tens of thousands of years ago. Elsewhere, they uncovered an extraordinary carved ivory tool designed specifically to twist plant fibers into strong rope. Think about what that means. Someone didn't just invent rope. They invented a specialized tool whose only purpose was making better rope. That kind of innovation doesn't happen while sprinting after prey across open grasslands. It happens during quiet hours spent experimenting, testing ideas, trying again after failure, improving one small detail at a time. Rain provided those hours, yet survival wasn't the only thing improving inside these shelters. People also began making life more comfortable. Many imagine prehistoric caves as cold, empty spaces where families slept directly on bare rock. The archaeological evidence paints a very different picture. At several ancient sites, researchers have found carefully prepared sleeping areas made from layers of grasses, reeds, and soft plants. These weren't random piles. The materials were deliberately arranged into sleeping mats. Even more surprising, some layers included aromatic leaves known to naturally repel insects. Instead of merely enduring their surroundings, these people actively improved them. Old bedding wasn't left to rot forever. It was periodically removed, burned, and replaced with fresh materials. That simple routine reduced parasites, insects, and unpleasant odors. In other words, people were cleaning their homes nearly 80,000 years ago. These discoveries completely changed the stereotype of prehistoric life. Our ancestors weren't simply surviving one day at a time, they were planning ahead, maintaining their living spaces, investing effort into comfort because comfort made survival easier. As the storm continued outside, every member of the group likely found a role. Some sharpened hunting weapons, others repaired damaged tools, experienced hunters inspected spear shafts for cracks. Older members shared techniques with younger ones. Children watched closely, slowly learning skills they would one day rely on themselves. Knowledge wasn't taught in classrooms, it was passed hand to hand, generation after generation. Every rainy season became another lesson, every storm became another opportunity to practice. By the time the skies finally cleared, the group wasn't weaker from staying indoors, they were stronger, their weapons were sharper. Their clothing was repaired, their supplies were organized, their shelters were more comfortable, and they carried new skills that would last a lifetime. But something even more extraordinary was beginning to happen. Once every tool had been repaired, every hide sewn, every length of rope twisted, people still had time, and with that extra time the human mind wandered somewhere completely unexpected, not toward survival, but toward imagination. Because deep inside dark caves, lit only by flickering firelight, someone picked up a piece of charcoal and began drawing on stone. That simple act would eventually become one of humanity's greatest achievements. The storm eventually passed, the rivers slowly settled, the mud began to dry, and once again the hunt could begin. But the people who stepped back into the wilderness weren't the same ones who had entered the cave days before. Their weapons were sharper, their clothing was stronger, their shelters were better prepared, and every member of the group carried new skills learned beside the fire. Looking back, it's easy to imagine those rainy days as time lost, days without hunting, days without progress, but the evidence tells a very different story. While the rain kept ancient humans inside, they weren't simply waiting for the weather to change, they were preparing for the future. Every tool they crafted, every stitch they sewed, every length of rope they twisted, improved their chances of surviving the next hunt, the next winter, and the next generation. In many ways, rain didn't interrupt human progress, it helped create it. Sometimes the greatest advances don't happen while we're moving forward, they happen when we're forced to stop, adapt, and make better use of the time we have. So the next time a storm keeps you indoors, remember that tens of thousands of years ago, those same rainy days may have become humanity's very first workshops. And perhaps that's one of the reasons we're still here today.